early morning hours of Thursday, and the thing you don't see on the news is what it's like away from the fire line, where the local news makes it look like it's chaos because inside the fire it is. But you get a couple blocks outside here on Hollywood Boulevard, it's eerily calm.
I usually have a hard time finding a parking spot in front of my building, but today it was wide open.
And I can't blame people, because after 2 days of watching the news, of seeing chaos happening in other communities where people had to leave suddenly, when you get an evacuation warning just to the north of you, you get out of here. And then I got thinking, a lot of these people evacuated down Hollywood Boulevard to the 101 freeway. It was really jammed about 5 o'clock last night. And they have a road diet where the city of LA has shrunk the road down.
And I'm wondering how that affects evacuations, and more importantly, fire trucks.
So at best, it takes about 10 minutes for a fire department to get out to a call, because first you need a minute or two for somebody to call 911, a minute or two for dispatch to call the fire department, a minute for them to get in the truck, load up, and then they actually have to drive out to the call, which takes several minutes. It's the most important part, so if they can shave a couple of minutes off that drive time, it could make the difference between life and death. So this is an American suburb. Some of the streets are huge, and a lot of cities, including Los Angeles, are trying to make the streets a little more livable, where you can shrink them down a little bit and try to use the space a little bit better. Just make room for bike lanes and for parking, make the crosswalks more narrow, get people to slow down. And it creates this huge catch-22. Fire department, they have a huge, giant vehicle. And you look at the stats on this thing. The normal thing we call a fire engine, they call a Type 1 fire apparatus, and they tend to weigh about 30,000 pounds, hold 500 gallons of water, and if you add that water in, that adds another 5,000 to 10,000 pounds. It's 10 feet wide, 40 feet long, and if you put one of those ladders on the back with all the hydraulics, then it weighs twice as much. So this thing is gigantic. And they're trying to speed this thing through the city as fast as they can, because every second counts. If it's a heart attack or a drowning victim, or in this case, a massive wildfire that could just explode out of control.
That's fine, man. We haven't received it. We receive it, and
you make the road fast enough for fire trucks to zip through here. Well, when I'm in my little tiny car, then it's really easy for me to really zip through here. And when everybody else does it too, you end up with an unsafe street. But I'll be honest, like, the fire code can get really strict. If you ever talk to anybody who's, in building, it can be total overkill sometimes of things that the International Fire Code requires. And honestly, 99.999% of the time, it is overkill. But then there's that one day where it prevents a fire, and then it was all worth it. So it's kind of strict for a reason. And so is it any surprise that a strict fire code, which would require wide streets, would also make its way onto our highway designs here in the United States? Well, of course not. Now, the good news is, I think there is a way we can kind of have our cake and eat it too. So when a city makes a street narrower, like LA did here on Hollywood Boulevard, sometimes you end up with they actually pour a curb clear out here. And then I can see the fire department getting mad and saying, well, we don't have our 20 feet anymore, because now you just have this little squishy 10-foot lane. But actually you still do, because one, they didn't put a curb there, they just put a painted line, so the fire truck could zag around here in the parking area if it's wide open. And two, they added a centered turn lane here in the middle, which actually helps the traffic flow a little bit better, because you get all the left turns out of the way, but also middle of the block, perfect place for the fire truck to be able to zag left and make its way around stopped traffic. So those are both win-wins. And if instead of, you do need a curb here, instead of putting concrete down, you could put one of those rubber mountable curbs there, and those are just barely tall enough to tell a driver of a car, hey, don't drive up on that, that's a curb. But it's nothing for a fire truck to drive over. As far as aggressively slowing cars down, there's a lot more traffic calming engineers and planners could do to a street. They've barely done any traffic calming here on Hollywood Boulevard at all, but that's for good reason. You need to have framework streets, planners say. These are streets that are supposed to be a little bit faster, a little bit wider, so that emergency vehicles that use them all the time can get through them. And then once you turn off the framework streets onto the neighborhood streets, well, those are the ones you can really slow down. Something that's an issue here in Los Angeles, older cities that are made up of a grid, is when you have traffic on one street, well, then you just go a block down the street and zip down through the neighborhood street instead. And so it's very tempting with a traffic calming plan to start closing off those streets so they become dead ends. And you got to work with the fire department, they say, to make sure that you're not closing a street that's really important for them to be able to pass through there. And if you do have to close it, put in barriers that maybe a car can't drive over, but a fire truck would have no problem driving over. But I suppose even if you give the fire department everything they want, you build a nice wide road like they had on Temescal Canyon Road up in the Palisades fire, you can still end up with a situation where everybody blocked the road anyway, and that's that famous video of the bulldozer from LA Fire having to push the cars out of the way to make room for the fire trucks. So,
like everything in transportation, it's complicated. Big video for January, still coming.
Parking on it, like what you have at Temescal Canyon Road.
We're here trying to keep the city hydrated.
What's the moment where you guys get out of here? Complex next door to you is on fire. You leave?
Absolutely
I'll tell
not.
you when we leave. We leave when Karen
I'm
Bass
leaving.
leaves.
Yep.
Yeah,
Tell
you
Karen
leave.
Bass, and let's get going with getting LA back to where it was.
Okay,
More
yo,
bike
you
lanes.
care about bike lanes more than the fires?